Hey Nibblings. One thing I recently did, and you've probably already seen it if you watched my latest short, is a time lapse of a Saturn Devouring His Son master painting. But also at the same time, I did a basically like a swipe of Ichabod devouring a bug in the same composition, using the same palette, same colors. And you have to forgive the quality at the very beginning. So I've never really recorded myself painting before. And so I tried using my camera. My camera's a little bit old, and also I did not even think about lighting until maybe about a couple minutes into this, but I promise you it gets better. The camera actually is a recurring theme because if you saw my short, you'll know that right before I even started recording, my camera was dead. The battery was dead. I had to charge it, and so that's part of the reason why I even decided to do two paintings at once, because I was getting ready to just get started, and then the camera was dead, so I couldn't record, and so I started sketching the sketch that you can see here for Saturn Devouring His Son, and I decided to do them both at the same time. And I wanted to talk about just the whole process, what I learned throughout it all, and how I plan to improve in the future as well. One main thing, again, the camera is recurring because you'll actually see this is mostly unedited, but the camera dies a few times actually, and the camera actually stops recording, which is something I just didn't realize because I never recorded for this long before. And I just swapped to recording with my phone, and it's a lot better. It's just worked a lot better. It was easier, and I didn't have as many issues. So you'll see like one or two jumps where you'll kind of miss some of what I'm doing here, but then later it gets a lot better. So here is where, yeah, I first stopped recording, and I realized I needed to turn on a freaking light because it's so dark. But anyways, as we actually get into it here, I've only just done the background here, and I'm mixing in some paint so I can actually make it a little bit more textured, a little bit more varied, have some more, I guess, ambiguous color to the back. But one thing I'm starting to notice, especially early on, and you can see this in the original, is that Francisco de Goya did not define Saturn all that well. He used very loose, very messy brush strokes. And so I feel like you mostly see this in the legs, right? You look at his right leg, right, on the left side, and it's very long and it's very kind of oddly shaped. It's really hard to tell where his actual calf begins and if there's a foot there or if there's rocks covering it. It's very difficult because of how messy those brush strokes are. In his left leg, it's clearly more in the light. There is a very clearly defined shadow that kind of casts over the top of his knee and his thigh. But even that is very messy. There's no indication where this calf begins, whether it goes back into space or whether it just goes down. There's just no indication at all. So I kind of just made the assumption that he's kneeling here. The other place I notice it is his right arm, right? So on the left side, where the elbow kind of starts and begins, it kind of melds together a little bit. And I think that I'm pointing all this stuff out not to be like Francisco de Goya doesn't know how to paint or doesn't define his subjects very well. I think on the contrary, he's so good at using loose brushstrokes for a painting like this that even though I've seen this painting, online hundreds of times, I've never seen it in person, but seen it online hundreds of times, I never really noticed any of that because his focal point is so well defined. It looks beautiful. I mean, the hands are so well done. The sun is very well done. The face, although a little bit cartoony in some ways, is also very well done. It's done in a simple but still kind of horrifying way. And so it doesn't really matter that the rest of it is so blurred and so hard to define. But that does make it difficult to replicate and to define how I would. So I had to take some liberties. I had to decide for myself what I was going to paint because I wasn't going to be able to replicate those loose brushstrokes to a T. I mean, if I really wanted to, I guess I could and just be really nitpicky about it, but I don't see the point in doing that. It doesn't really help. So I was just going to make my own loose brushstrokes, try to mimic it somewhat, but just take my own liberties. The other thing I'll note is the reason that I even started doing this. So I started with a master painting, which was just by coincidence. It was also Francisco de Goya. It was The Witch's Flight. And I did it in the sketchbook on the left. And I made a short about it. And people seemed to really respond to that short more than most of my other ones. But a big common theme was people telling me to use this nicer sketchbook on the right, because what I say at the very beginning is that I bought this nice sketchbook and it was so nice. I did that typical artist thing where you buy something too nice and then you don't want to use it because you're like, oh, I'm not ready for it. Which in some ways is true because I never really paint. I painted some in school, but it never really was something that I focused a lot of attention to. I did some digital painting. I did a lot of digital painting in school, but still, even then, I think pen and ink and graphite, those are mostly my my preferred tools. So I wanted to do more painting. I wanted to get more familiar with it because I felt that doing it the traditional way would actually help me with my digital painting later on. So I did this Witch's Flight. I wanted to practice, and because I felt that this sketchbook was too nice, I went and got this Strathmore one with only about 15 sheets. And it's still a nice sketchbook. It's not a bad sketchbook by any means. The outside is just not pretty. It's just a Strathmore sketchbook. And so I did the Witch's Flight in there, and then everybody was like, oh, you should do the paintings in the nicer one. You're not going to use it if you're just going to pretend like eventually you'll be good enough to use it. You're going to forget about it, which is true. I knew that myself by the time I was already working in the sketchbook. So one of the suggestions was that I use the nicer sketchbook for originals. And I thought that was a great idea, that I would keep doing some of these master paintings in the Strathmore. And then this nicer one would be just for originals in between, whenever I felt like it. So that's what I decided to do. But I decided it would be fun to make a video where I would pay homage to that Francisco de Goya and that Witch's Flight that I did by doing a swipe, basically, of Saturn Devouring His Son, but it made a lot more sense to pick that one because of its cannibalistic nature, that I would use Ichabod, who is a cannibal, to do this. The only thing was, obviously Saturn is huge compared to his sons, and Ichabod is not a very big guy. He's just a pretty regular sized guy. But he does eat the bugs in one of the more recent chapters. So I thought that was a great idea. We could just do the bugs. And the camera dying kind of sparked the rest of it, as I've already mentioned. But now you can finally see me working on Ichabod himself. You'll see me jump back and forth throughout the time lapse, and you'll notice that as my camera died for the last and final time, I switch over to my phone, which I think also is just better quality in general. But you'll notice that I'll spend a lot of time on one painting, and then I'll jump back to the other one. And sometimes that really depends on the color of paints that I'm using. If I'm using a lot of the grays, I'll start with Ichabod, and then I'll realize, oh, I need gray for some of the hair, and then I'll jump back to Saturn, and then there's also yellow in the hair, so then I'll start using yellow, and then I'll jump back and forth depending on the colors that I'm using. So that made it feel pretty fluid and not so confusing to do two paintings at once, because I was using the exact same palette, and because they had the same composition, it really didn't make it very difficult at all to focus on these two things. And I feel like if you are neurodiverse, you might actually enjoy this a lot more, to be able to jump back and forth between two things. Because one thing I did notice is sometimes, like especially when I'm doing this hair, I feel like the hair, I could have benefited more from working it a little bit more. But I got really bored. I was like, this is not looking the way I want it to. I'm getting a little discouraged. And eventually I'm like, let's just hop over to Ichabod, work on that a little bit more, and then I'll come back to it. One thing I also really liked about this whole process is that while I'm working with these colors and trying to figure things out, I'll learn something on the Saturn painting and be able to then immediately apply it to the Ichabod one, and vice versa. So again, I'm not really a painter. I'm not that familiar with acrylic paint, and so I'm learning how to paint this whole time. And so I'll learn something and then have that process of repetition where you repeat something over and over again, you eventually learn it. But I'll be able to fast track that because I will learn it right away and then apply it right away. And then it feels a little bit more ingrained. And it just kept happening back and forth and back and forth. And that was really cool. That was actually a really cool experience. Honestly, I thought this was more of a whole like challenge video that I was doing, but it just felt like it made my learning a lot better, a lot faster. I also want to mention that both of these sketchbooks actually use they're like different aspect ratios, basically is how I would put it. The Saturn painting is actually a lot wider, and the Ichabod painting is actually a lot more narrow. It's a little bit taller. So there are some parts where I had to kind of extend the background a bit, or shrink it a little bit in other places, or make Saturn a bit taller than I wanted to. That's not really a big deal because there's so much negative space in the painting. But it is something that I wanted to point out, that I started to notice as I was going through it, that I was like, oh, actually there is a difference beyond just the characters that are in here. The size of the canvas is different. One thing about the Saturn master painting that I realized was just so well done is actually Saturn's hands. Saturn's hands are done with very simple brush strokes, but there's such a beautiful blend of color that define the flesh tones of Saturn. And Saturn is very yellow. He's very yellow. He's kind of pale in some ways and kind of sickly looking. And there's still just a beautiful blend of flesh tones. And that's not something I was able to replicate, try as I might. I think there was some things I was able to do a little bit more as I get further into this time lapse. But, I mean, Goya is just a master at this. And I realized that too as I was doing The Witch's Flight. And you can watch that short on my channel as well. To get an idea of what the Witch's Flight looked like and what my final version looked like. The skin tones that he does, they're really masterful, and he does them in small brush strokes, as well as just keeping things very, very simple, but still very easily defining the form of the human. And I think that's a big trait of master painters, even modern day master painters. If you're able to define things with very simple brush strokes, that's the key. That's the key, is that simplification, but also like a good understanding of what it all looks like and how to depict it in a 2D space. I also found a lot of enjoyment in the actual sun. His son that he's devouring, his back is actually, I think, painted really cool. I did it a little bit differently, but I really enjoyed trying to depict that form because it is a simple form. It is a back, right? In the end, you can simplify it down to just a box. But, there's a lot of muscles in there that he's showing, and I try to do the same thing. I try to define it in the way that I would, I guess, replicate the anatomy of a back. Again, slightly different from what's already in the painting, but I like how mine turned out. I liked that part of it a lot. You can also notice that this, as I'm really working through the Saturn version, I'm avoiding two things, and that's the eyes, and I'm also avoiding the blood, because I think those are very important details of the painting that are also going to be a little bit difficult to replicate. The sun, or sorry, not the sun, the eyes are actually so simple, but I feel like that placement it's vital to be able to replicate this painting. The eyes they really matter. And my canvas compared to the original, because the original is it's not like a giant painting or anything, but it is a big canvas. Like, he's working on a big canvas, which I think makes the painting a lot cooler if you were able to see it in person. I hope to do that one day. But I mean, I'm working on a tiny little thing. And my brush, you can see most of what I'm working with is just this tiny little brush. And even then, getting some of these small details is actually really hard. Sometimes just, a little bit of a handshake can really mess up what you're trying to do. And so getting to those eyes was something that I really just wanted to wait on. I didn't want to jump into it right away. And also, I didn't do a lot of work on the face as much at the beginning, and so I'm only just now starting to get some of that in there, because I do notice there's a lot of tones in there too. There's a lot of yellow, obviously, that's the main color you'll see here, but there's some darker tones on the cheeks. There's also a lot of red, kind of orange color in there, and there's hints of eyebrows as well. And I felt like if I was going to go for the eyes, I need to have the face down, taken care of already. So that's what I was doing at this point, trying to get some of those put in there. Some of my paints at this point, because again, you have to forgive that I'm just not a painter. It's something that I'm learning to do. But as I mix paint, sometimes I'm just not getting quite the right color. I'm very used to digital art where I'm able to just kind of pick the color and be able to just do it that way. And mixing the paints yourself is it's a difficult learning curve, especially at the beginning. I feel like it's not the easiest to just nail those colors down. I know it just takes practice, and so I'm not discouraged by that, but sometimes what that means is I'll put down the color thinking I've got it right, or I'll get something kind of adjacent to what I was looking for, and when I put it down, it doesn't look as good as I want it to. But then I'll just have to wait a little bit, let it dry, put something else on top to try to remedy whatever it was. And sometimes that's okay because it lets that color beneath kind of come through. Other times it's a little bit more difficult because acrylic kind of just covers things up sometimes. So it's a balance. But I do finally go for the blood here. And I also really enjoy the way that the blood turned out. I thought this is probably one of the only spots where I thought I learned something from doing it on the Saturn version. And I was like, oh, it's going to look even better in the Ichabod version. And actually, I think the blood turned out better on the Saturn version. And whatever I thought I learned, it didn't turn out the way I thought it would. Not that the blood necessarily looks bad on the bug, but I do think that the Saturn one compared to it, it just looks better there. The blood was actually really kind of cool because it's just this bright red that I have, and I only just added a bit of black and white to certain shades to brighten it up a little bit, and only just a little bit. I really didn't want to make it super dark or desaturate it, so I really tried to just make some small variations and only just small little bits of white light for the blood to make it look a little bit more liquid, which it seems like Francisco de Goya did a little bit of that, but probably even less so than what I did. I get brave enough to do the eyes. I think the eyes initially, the placement is right, but I think the whites of the eyes were far too big to start. And so it kind of looks a little wrong. And again, the small details, like just being able to put a dot down with these small brushes on such a small canvas, it's hard. It's not easy. What I do think I would have done differently if I were to start all over from the very beginning is I think I would actually just get bigger canvases, because since painting is not as accurate of a medium as something like drawing or pen, where you can just like really get the tiniest detail down where you want it, I would just want a bigger canvas so I can have a little bit more grace whenever trying to do small details like that. In the end, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think people who paint would understand that, especially for somebody who literally just started painting. But it is probably something that I would do a little bit differently. I think I would be able to do this a little bit more justice with a bigger canvas, but I'm not really sweating it. Again, the whole point of me doing these was to practice, to study some of these masters a little bit more, and to get familiar with painting in general, because it's something I want to do a lot more. But I think being able to paint would actually make me better, both at digital painting and also just drawing in general, thinking with shapes instead of thinking in lines, because most of my artwork is actually line based. And I like that style a lot. I wouldn't abandon that, but I think there's a lot of benefits to thinking within shapes instead. I'm jumping back to the Ichabod one, and I'll be on this for, I think, quite a bit, because a lot of the Saturn one is actually kind of done. At least the foundation is done. I do try to layer in a couple of things later on, but in general, I really just need to get Ichabod caught up. And so since I was using some of those yellows and some of those greens, I'm going to start doing that with the bug. The bug, if you don't know, is called the chooch. It is a bug native to the Hydrox caves. And if you're like, what the heck is this guy talking about? Ichabod, this ghost fella on the right, he is my main character of my comic book that I'm writing called Kannibal. Kannibal with a K. And you can read it for free. It's always linked in the description. But Ichabod is a cannibal, and he eats people and he absorbs their abilities. That's his main ability. He's essentially a creepier Kirby, because as soon as he craps them out, the ability is gone. And so I believe it's the 6th chapter. He eats a bug. They encounter bugs. These bugs are actually a mixture, at least in design, the way I design them. They're a mixture of a camel spider, which is not actually a spider, but a camel spider, as well as a type of, I wouldn't say it's a fly. Maybe it's a little bit more of a moth, but not quite. It's a small flying insect, but its defense mechanism is a toxic gas that is released from its back half. So it's exactly what it sounds like. And so that is the inspiration for these bugs, is that they are fart bugs. And that's their little ability, is that they release this toxic gas that slowly paralyzes the prey so they can eat it. And they are big bugs. Some of them are bigger than Ichabod. Some of them are smaller. You get to see a good amount of them throughout the, I think, 6th and 7th chapter. They're in both of them. But yeah, one of my favorite things is that once they kind of get out of that situation, Ichabod has a bug leg and he's chomping on it like it was just any old turkey leg. And so you can imagine with his ability where that might go. I'm hoping to release more of Kannibal soon. I am about halfway through the next chapter, and so I need to do some other work besides just drawing it, on top of getting everything put together. There's a little bit of extra stuff to do. But hopefully you'll see some of that soon. Ichabod is, I think, in some ways actually a little scarier looking than Saturn at the end of it all. And I wonder if it's maybe just within the face, just how there's like a little less soul to having no eyes and having these crosses for eyes instead. And also just the lipstick with the teeth showing, which is something you don't see on Saturn. On Saturn, especially if you look at the reference here, you really only get to see like some of the shadows within his mouth, kind of showing maybe that's like really just the arm of his son, and then like maybe like the top of his mouth, and that's about it. You really don't see teeth. You don't really see anything. It just kind of looks like a black expanse that is swallowing his son. So pretty creepy. But in Ichabod, because I know Ichabod's got this big old cheeky smile, I had to put it in there. And he also always has this black lipstick on, and so I think that actually kind of gives him, my wife put it as like Terrifier vibes. So I don't know. I mean, Ichabod is certainly a goofy guy, but also a bit creepy. He's not necessarily the friendliest, not somebody you'd like want to walk on the same side of the street as. So I think it's okay for him to be a little bit creepy. One thing with Ichabod, because he's wearing this big sheet over him, I had to really think about the lighting going on for Saturn and how to apply that to Ichabod, because there's just some things that don't exist in the Ichabod version that do exist in the Saturn. For example, Saturn's left arm is holding his son, right? But Ichabod doesn't have a forearm. He has just his wrist and hand, and then he's got basically like the bicep, which is covered by the sheet. And so there's a shadow that is directly below Saturn's left arm, right? It's casting on his left leg. That wouldn't exist in the Ichabod version. Right? So I had to make that lighter, not darker, because there would be no shadow cast there. The other thing is that Saturn has a lot of hair that would cast on his left shoulder, and Ichabod does not. Ichabod is covered by his sheet, and so there is still some shadow there because his head would still cast the shadow, but not all of that hair. So it's far less darker on Ichabod. So interesting things I had to think about as I'm trying to navigate Ichabod a little bit more, because I honestly thought it would be easier to do that kind of swipe, but because Ichabod's body is just different in some ways, I really had to think about it a little bit more. And that was both challenging and fun, because I'm able to do that when I'm just drawing normally, but it is, I think, a little bit more difficult to get that level of rendering that I would want while I'm painting, which is something I'm, again, not very experienced in. At some point too, you'll kind of notice that I've changed the bug from like that dark green to the yellow. I wanted that like dark green base and then layer the yellow on top. And I'm actually really happy with the way that turned out, because one thing I was thinking about this entire time is that Kannibal is entirely in black and white with some splashes of color here and there, but mostly it is in black and white. And that means that I've never actually drawn the chooch bugs in color. And so I had no idea what color to make them. And so I thought green I would work out first, but as I started working with the green and as I was working with the skin in Saturn, I thought maybe that kind of same color palette would not only look nice for the bugs, but I think it would join these two paintings together a little bit more. You know, there's yellow on both, there's red on both, there's that gray to white on both, and then the green background in the back on both. And so I think that unifies them together a little bit nicer. I'm nearing the end of this here. I'm pretty much finishing up what I've got to do on Ichabod and the bug, trying to clean up some of the edges here. I left some of the edges a little bit messy intentionally. I thought it was okay for it to look that way. I feel like it gives it some of that painterly look. But I'm essentially just finishing the chooch here, finishing some of the wings, because I did want them to look slightly transparent with some of those veins that bugs have. So I do add a layer of white over the top, but then I'll go over it again to unify it with the rest of the body, give it the yellow tint, but also give it that transparent look a little bit. It really kind of ends up looking a little bit more shiny than transparent. It's not, I've never painted with acrylic something transparent like that. So it's a learning curve for me. But I think it turned out well regardless. So finishing up some of these final little details, just trying to check my rendering, seeing what I want to do at the very end. I think there's something that I miss here at some point where I realize I haven't actually done anything for Ichabod's hands, because Ichabod's hands are not, they're not like flesh. They are they're wrapped in bandages, right? So I have to actually draw the lines for those bandages and put in a little bit of shadow and light on top of them, because the way that Saturn's hands, I think, reflect some of those, the light, have some of those deep shadows. I think it's important to try to mimic that the best that I can for Ichabod, even though he has that little bit of jewelry on his right hand. I'm not sure if I'm not sure if it's one of those things where I should have spent more time rendering it or not, because there's something about how simple I left the hands that I like. But I'm just kind of left wondering if it would be better if I did render it all the way. So maybe there is a world where I should have done that, but I'm okay with leaving it as it is. Again, like, some things being left simple, I think it's an important lesson to figure that stuff out as I go. It's something that painting forces you to think about a lot more. So I'm good with that. Here, I'm pretty much finished. This is what the final version looked like. I'm curious what you guys think. If you think that the Saturn one looks better, or if you like the Ichabod one better. But I would encourage anybody who's interested in doing something like this to give it a shot, because it was a lot of fun. But here you can see them compared to each other. So let me know what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching Nibbling if you're still around. I really appreciate it. A like and a subscribe would be greatly appreciated as well. But I'll see you guys next time.